Welcome back. I apologize for my delays in publishing videos. I have been preparing for the Olympics, which I will be watching from home. In this two-part video, I will be notching and installing the Chine top rails. This video will focus on notching each of the frames. I had to make a second video because I've run into a lot of challenges with actually installing the top rail beams. As Dan Lee had done in his quarter scale build, I first make a jig that allows me to mark the notches on each of the frames. The cross section of the jig is 1 9/16 inch square. This is the same size as the Chine top rail. The overhang is 1/4 inch. By placing the jig along the side of each frame at the Chine flat, I can trace the notch that needs to be cut out of each frame to accommodate the top rail. I always make this mark on the aft side of the frame. What will ultimately happen here is when I put the Chine top rail in place, it should overhang the edge of each frame by 1/4 inch. The same will be true of the side battens. I tried a few methods of cutting out the notches. I used a handsaw and I used the oscillating tool. In the end, I think the handsaw is the best method. I used a track saw to cut my 1 9/16 square top rails. Or so I thought. I quickly found out that they were too thick to bend and twist to the profile of the boat. Even though these large square timbers will not be used in the boat, I cut grooves into it so that it would be more flexible to both bend and twist. Where feasible, I use this grooved top rail to check the fit into the notches that I cut into each frame. Ultimately, you don't want to use this in the boat because you don't want any single board thicker than 1 inch thick. And there was no way I was going to get those grooves fully filled with epoxy. As you'll see in the second of these two videos, I end up creating the top rail out of several thinner battens. I found that 7/8 inch square was small enough to bend and thick enough to hold a fair curve. For the remainder of this video, I'll continue marking and notching the frames, detailing both the things I've learned and the mistakes I made. Notice that I always put my wooden guide tool aligned to the outer edge on the side of the boat. This way, the top rail will always be parallel to the frame and 1/4 inch proud of each frame. Cutting out the notches is pretty straightforward here at the back of the boat. And when I did run into trouble, I called in another expert from the UK.
Here we are, making Damnley proud. Cheers, Dan. Did you trust Drew this much?
No.
Do you not give Drew a sword?
I
Just so that guy built stuff.
At this point, I thought I should go into a bit more detail on how my jig works.
Okay, so now we take this tool here and we see it can fit right in the slot. It lines up at the top here, and then at the front here it should have a 1/4 inch hangover. And from this tool, we can see we're pretty darn close to that 1/4 inch hangover. So I think this one in the transom is pretty good.
While the notch looked good, I later learned that at the transom, we should not be using that tool. Not only should the chine top rail be 3/4 inch above the bottom of the transom, I also learned that we do not need the 1/4 inch overhang on the edge.
Okay, so I made a mistake cutting out the notch for the chine top rail. It turns out the chine is supposed to come right to the top of this, and the chine itself is 3/4 inch thick. So what I need to do is bring my tool to that point. So if this was the notch, it would go like that. You bring that right to that point there. And hopefully that bottom is parallel to these other notches. Level. Yep, that's about right. So all these back frames are supposed to be parallel. So I got to take 3/4 of an inch more out of that notch. And that's what I'll do now. This board will fit in here. So I see an issue here is that when I lined everything up, even though the back end of this boat's supposed to be straight, my transom curves out. And I believe the reason is that every one of the frames, the chine top rail is supposed to be 1/4 inch off. But at the very back here, it's supposed to come right to that edge, which makes me realize I cut this transom wrong. This needs to be an additional 1/4 inch in. So I'm gonna take this off and move it in so I get a nice curve around the back of the boat.
And then I can check for fairness using the first of my top rail laminates. When you notch the frames at the front of the boat, you need to angle your cuts towards the next frame in front of it, both vertically and horizontally.
What I'm trying to do to approximate this angle is I'm lining up the aft line from frame 2 with the aft line of frame 3, and it gives me an idea what angle I need to be cutting this at. Okay, now that I'm at the back line here, the aft line, now I got to get this angle down a little bit. So this saw is going to angle down right about there. Same concept here. Okay, so we cut out these notches and I didn't go right up to the line everywhere. So I think it's good to have a shorter piece of the top rail exactly to the size you want it so you can see how well these fit. I put these grooves in thinking I could bend it, but this is pretty stiff stuff. But instead what I can do is see how well this fits in here. See, am I getting a 1/4 inch overlap and is it butting up in here? And you can see this one's pretty rocky. And the reason is, when I look at my line, I have more to sand off there. So what I'm trying to do now is I'm going to go through and sand out these top rail notches so that it fits properly here, right to that edge, like that. And, you know, so maybe I'm a little high, but thickened epoxy will fill that, or a little low, that thickened epoxy will fill it. Or this chine flash a little high, one of the two. And then I gotta measure that overhang to make sure it's about a 1/4 inch in each of the locations. Here it's definitely more than a 1/4 inch, but as I told you, I have a scaling issue on frame 13, so I may have to have these overhang a little bit. But let me work on frame 12 here and let you see what I'm trying to do. So I have pretty good overhang here. I might be just a little bit proud at the 1/4 inch line right there. So I don't have a whole lot to take out. I want to get a little bit tighter so I can see where I need to come out just a little bit. So that's what I'm going to work on here. Okay, I'm good here. What you may or may not be able to see is definitely have a much bigger gap here on frame 13. I think I'm just going to have to figure out what this gap is and see if there's just a constant gap that has to go around frame 13. So we'll figure it out. And notice that this whole thing, if I put it flat on frame on the transom, it rotates. So this board needs to twist. This is too big, so I'll show you how I handle that. But we'll keep moving down here. Okay. So this one feels pretty good, and yeah, it's a little bit proud. But I went right to the line. Yeah, this one's a little proud too. I'm trying to decide how much I want to take off on it. I might just take a hair more off. See if I can get that seated there in the bottom. I like the angle on this one, just a tiny bit more seated. That feels pretty good. Not bad. Not bad. I think I'm gonna keep this as it is. I hate to go overboard and mess this up. I'm gonna keep working my way down. The top looks good. Now it's a little bit further back, but again, I'm right on that line, so I don't want to take any more. I don't want to take any more in. I think I'm going to leave that one okay. Frame 9. This one's a hard one to figure out. I'm narrow here on the gusset. Got a little angle to it, but I think that one is seating pretty well. Now what's hard, and you can't see this very well, but when I go straight, this one's seated, so 11 is seated, 9 is seated, and there's a gap here to frame 10. So while it looks proud right now, this would go in, but it's hard to figure out the right curve. So I'm gonna have to the curve of the boat and how it looks is gonna be more important than if I have little gaps at each frame, because if I try to make everyone fit perfect, I could end up with a curve on the Chine top rail that looks like this, rather than have a nice, smooth Chine top rail. So this one I feel pretty good about. Boy, now you can really see these start coming down at an angle. So now from frame 9 forward, everything really starts sloping. So you can see that it went from it being pretty straight to all of a sudden, I gotta have this bend down. Please know, I'm not yet with this board trying to figure out if I have this angle right. I need to have a more bendable Chine top rail to do this. I'm fitting good here. I'm a little proud, but I'm okay. Here, they're pretty good. Now this thing starts bending in. You can see my issue is with this giant board. It's really hard to get that to bend like that. So I'm gonna use a smaller top rail to get this thing started. But okay, I got that one in. Got just shy of close to a 1/4 inch there. Okay. Just shy, I'm not proud. So I'm right on the line. I think I'm gonna leave it alone. Every time I over sand, I regret what I do here. Now I'm hoping that when this whole boat comes together, that when I'm off by 1/16 of an inch or so, it's really not gonna be noticeable. But being the first time I've ever made a boat, I don't know. So this one I cut, it looks like it's too deep. So when I mount it, maybe it comes out just a little bit. And it's hard because it is the back side that has to be flush, where a lot of this is gonna get shaved, it has to get shaped. Here, the back side is at a 1/4 inch. The front side you can see is way far out, but I did go a little deep on it. So I'll have to give some thought to what I do here. Maybe it doesn't go all the way down. Yeah, I cut that one a little bit deep is what I did. And according to my board, I did it okay. No, a little deep. So I wish I knew exactly what I did to cause that to be a little deep, but regardless, it's a little bit deep. I think all of these are just a little bit deep, but it's hard to tell. This one seems to be okay. This one's definitely a little deep. So the notches I think are going to be good enough to start putting the first batten in. And I'm not going to put in a full thickness because, as you can see, I just cannot bend this. I know a lot of people said to stem it or to steam it, and Dan advised against steaming because it can hold residual water and cause the boat to rot. And when boards get more than an inch thick, the reason you want to start with a thin board is, let's say you get a little bit of rot here, instead of it going all the way through the board, it's better to have it stop so you have a good piece of wood blocked by epoxy. So
just going with no more than 1 inch thick of laminate anywhere really helps you ensure a long life of the boat. So since it's going to take me my whole life to build it, I might as well make sure it lasts a little while. So now what I'm going to do is put a 7/8 inch square, I'll call it a section of the Chine top rail in here. And I'm just going to start fitting this in and clamping it. You can see now what will happen is I will end up cutting this board so it fits flush up against the stem here. It gives you an idea how I'm trying to come along this and get a nice curve down that boat. And on this side, I don't have everything clamped in, so hard to tell as well. But you get an idea of what the process is. I have one final point for this video. Okay, so what I want to show is as the Chine top rail comes across here, on the template we mark, Dan has marked the Chine top. So these are where the Chine laminates are going to be, which means this 1 9/16 inch thick top rail is going to land right there. So all this is going to come along to here, and I've marked the same thing on the other side. So when I bend it around, that first board I want to line right up to the bottom of that, or the top of that Chine rail when flipped upside down. And rather than notching the stem, I'm going to follow the methodology used by Serdar Bas. I'll stop this video here as I think it details how you cut out the notches quite well. In my next video, I'll be finishing the Chine top rails and bonding them into place. Till next time, cheers.